Thank you all for coming tonight. We're just going to wait a couple more minutes. We have a couple more panelists joining us. We appreciate you all coming. Just get started in a couple minutes with introducing the panelists. Dr. Shank will bring us through, and then he'll be asking the questions this evening to the panelists, and they'll be going through and answering them just in whatever order, whoever wants to speak first, panelists. And then we'll do some question and answer time as well, and then we'll do some breakout rooms afterwards, just with each of the panelists individually. And for students, you can just let me know which breakout room that you would like to go to. So.
Well, it's going to be embarrassing when mine ends up empty.
No,
Me and Dr. Shank can hang out. It'll be fun.
What happens if I want to go to Mcdaniel's breakout room?
See, that's what we had happen during the last alumni mixer. All of the 2008, 2009 alumni wanted to just hang out together. So if it happens, hey, y'all have a great time. Okay, and let me know if I say anything wrong, alumni, but I'm just going to start by order of graduating class. So I'm going to introduce Laura first, and I'll just go through and introduce you and then say what year you graduated from, and I'll let you just say where you work currently and what your position is. So Laura Fernicula, I'm hoping I pronounced your name correctly, because we go back and forth between when you graduated from Congleton and Fornicula, but Laura graduated in 2003. So she is our alumni who's had the most experience in DC. She was one of the first graduating classes from the Croft Institute. And so she's known all of the different, professors who have come through and has a lot of experience with just the professional side outside of Croft. So I'll just let you introduce your profession.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. So, and don't worry about the last name. It's challenging for everybody, Fornicola, or if you speak Italian, Fornicola. But absolutely. So my current position, as has been for approximately 7 years, is managing the US-UK Mutual Defense Agreement. So I'll get into that in a little more detail as we have our discussions, but it is defense in the aspect of our nuclear deterrence. That's really the central aspect of what we do on that international treaty.
Great, thank you. Okay, and next is Jess Holst, and Jess graduated in 2007. If you'll just introduce yourself, Jess, and just say what you currently are doing.
Sure, I'm Jess. I will use a lot of acronyms, which is a thing you have to get used to if you go to DC. But I'll start by giving you the full name. I work for the United States Agency for International Development in a tiny office called the Office of Transition Initiatives. We run programs in about 16 countries around the world right now. I'm posted in Bogota, Colombia, and I'm happy to tell you a little bit more about what we do.
Thank you so much. Okay, our next alumnus is Bob Lynch, and Bob graduated in 2008 from Croft.
Yeah, hi everyone. Happy to be here. Happy to speak with you all. I work for Guidehouse Consulting. We're a management consulting firm headquartered in Washington, but we have about 8,000 employees around the world in offices from Asia to Europe and everywhere in between. I am on our Homeland Security account, and I specifically do work with our FEMA account. I manage several projects that involve hurricane response, COVID-19 response, a very ongoing issue, obviously, and also mitigating against future disasters. So we have pandemic and some hurricane-related response recovery efforts that we are helping lead with the agency.
Thank you, Bob. And our next alumnus is Mcdaniel Wicker. And McDaniel graduated in the class in 2009.
Hey, everybody. Real pleasure to be here. I only wish this was in person in Oxford. That's the only way this could be any better. But I'm currently the Vice President for Strategy for Babel Street Incorporated. We're an open source intelligence data analytics company, and we have a lot of customers across the US government and several international partners as well, working in the defense, security, intelligence space, as well as with private businesses for things like market awareness and brand management. I've been here for about a year. Before that, though, I was at DIA, where I was working in the operations side of the house, and that was part of my time as an Air Force intelligence officer, which is the majority of my background since graduating from Croft.
Thank you. And our last alumni of the evening who we'll introduce is Tori Thoman, and Tori graduated in 2013.
Great, thank you. And I apologize in advance if my dog decides to make an appearance. She's having a lot of feelings today. But yeah, my name's Tori Thoman. I currently work as a desk officer at the U.S. Department of State, working specifically on China issues and China human rights issues. I've held several positions at the department since I joined back in 2014, and happy to take any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for introducing yourselves and just saying what you do currently. Dr. Shank is going to start now just by asking some questions for the panelists. Panelists, you're welcome to just jump in, whoever wants to speak first. There's no particular order. We just want the students to hear your responses and get your viewpoints on these different questions.
All right, so thank you. It's great to see everybody virtually again. And so first, and again, like Mr. Sarnes was saying, feel free to just jump in. You don't have to go in the order that you were introduced or anything like that. So first, why are you working in Washington, D.C., and how does it fit into your larger career plans? There you go.
It's always hard to go first, so I'll start.
I was going to say I'll call on someone if they know, and I've taught. I know how to do this.
So I think it probably goes without saying, but there's so many opportunities in DC. I honestly moved here right after undergrad without a job, and it didn't take me long to find one. There's think tanks, there's nonprofits, there's of course the federal government, there's large and small corporations, and I've actually worked for, I've done a few of those across that spectrum, and so there's just a lot of opportunity here, and that was one of the main reasons why I decided to move to DC.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I'll echo the diversity of options. One of the reasons that I ended up in DC is I'm actually married to a fellow Croftie. We graduated in 2009 together. She did Latin American and I did East Asian. And after we lived in Japan while I was in the Air Force for a little while, and coming out of Japan, we were thinking about where to go, and really the only place to do Latin American studies and East Asian kind of focused stuff at the same time. You really have California or DC, and so DC was a logical option. It also just makes a lot of sense, especially if you want to focus in the security, defense, or intelligence, world. This is the hub. This is where you come at least to get a start and maybe figure out what the landscape looks like, start to understand who the different players are and what your niche is going to be. Because you can't saying I want to do security is really far too broad. It's like saying I want to go to college. You have to start narrowing it down and figure out, do I want to do nuclear security? Do I want to focus on the intelligence analyst part of that? Do I want to focus on a specific country? Do I want to work more on the policy side of things? And there's just this whole spectrum of choices you have, and it's really only available in its fullness here in Washington.
Yeah, I'll say I didn't intend to stay here as long as I have. I think a lot of people have designs of, coming to DC, building up their resume and going somewhere else. I mean, I did move to Boston for a little bit and then moved back to DC. So, I think it does come back to opportunities, both in the public sector and private sector, right? I mean, there are lots of great opportunities obviously in the federal government space, whether it be at the Pentagon or the State Department or USAID, whatever it may be. But there's also lots of opportunities in finance, consulting, tech. DC is actually low-key kind of a big tech hub. There's a lot of tech up here too. So a lot of people come to Washington because there just are a lot of industries here that demand people that are critical thinkers, have a lot of skills. And kind of like what Mcdaniel mentioned, you might come here and say, I'm really interested in China, for example, but then you really kind of narrow that down. And as your career progresses, you can kind of develop a level of expertise, and that kind of becomes your brand. And then you kind of get stuck here as things go. So that's kind of why I'm here.
I might be one of those people Bob just mentioned who goes to DC to leave it. That is definitely what I did. So I I graduated from Croft. I went back to Nashville, moved back in with my parents, waited tables, and started the job search. I was going to get a job. And I distinctly remember finding my dream job in a UN human rights office in Bucaramanga, Colombia. And it required so many years of experience and a master's degree. And as I started looking through the jobs that really called to me, I realized that I had to get an MA. So I looked at places across the country, but I ended up sort of being called to DC. I remember the Elliott School, which is where I went at GW. At the time, they had this map on their website that was sort of located them in relation to the State Department, USAID, the Pentagon, the CIA. And in retrospect, it looked a little bit like a pentagram, which is maybe why it's not on their website anymore. But that was a huge selling point was, we will put you in physical proximity to all of these incredible places to work, plus all of the places that McDaniel and Bob mentioned. So I think, proximity to those places, proximity to the people working there. At the time, when I graduated from Croft, I will admit, I don't think I had a clue what international development was. I just knew that I needed to be in DC to figure out the array of options that were available.
And I'll just add on to the great points that everyone has already made. Similar to Laura, I was one of the folks who moved to DC after graduation unemployed with the intention of just figuring it out. And that's what I did. I waited tables and worked several temp jobs before I got my first break as a DoD contractor. DC is a really excellent place to start trying to figure out what you actually want to be when you grow up. And I've had several friends who've moved up here knowing that they wanted to work on their pet rock issue. And through the job search and through actually working on that pet rock issue, decided that they really wanted to work on something else entirely. And being in this city where there's so many passionate people working on really fascinating subjects, it's a great place to really explore where you want your career to take you and kind of bring it into fruition.
Just kind of building off of those comments, I think there's a theme that a lot of people move to DC without a job, and that is completely normal. I would say that is the norm, is that you don't have a job when you get here, but getting here is actually really important. It is very hard to find a DC job without being in DC, because so much of DC is it's social, it's a network, and it's very important to get up here and start meeting people, working the Croft network to say, hey, do you know anybody that's looking for a person that does, German finance? And you're like, no, but Bob's kind of at least has been in that world. He might know somebody, and you start working that. You start having coffees and having these little meetings and building out that and figuring out, all right, well, who are the contractors that work in the world? Who are the government agencies that work in that world? And then you just slowly build that knowledge, and eventually you kind of find your way into one situation. And just because you end up in one government contractor or one Hill office or one private industry doesn't mean you're going to stay there long. There's so many opportunities to then continue building that career path once you land in DC and land that first job.
Yeah, I would just add, I don't know, this may be particular to my field. I bet Laura experiences this and probably the rest of the alum, but jargon is very important. And learning the vocabulary of DC can be a huge benefit. I remember before I left Nashville for DC, I used a friend's DC address because I knew it was important to look like I was in DC when I was applying for things. And I think I applied to internships at like 6 think tanks, right? Brookings, CSIS, maybe the Fund for Peace if it existed back then. 5 or 6 places who I didn't hear a word from, right? I wrote my little cover letter. I'm excited about something. I didn't know what. I'm interested in something. I think it's international. And so it wasn't surprising that I didn't hear back from them. I finally ended up sort of ginning up internships once I was on the ground and in grad school. And in fact, at the Elliott School, it was an expectation that all of their classes were in the evening, so you were supposed to be working during the day. And this is another point that I think is super important. DC is an overwhelming place, right? I sort of circled up some friends here in Bogota last weekend and I said, what would you tell graduating undergrads about DC? And we talked about the fact that the very first question, no matter where you are, in what setting, is, so what do you do? And when you haven't done anything, it can be a pretty intimidating question, especially when you're surrounded by people who have done incredibly impressive things. And I remember definitely feeling that insecurity starting at the Elliott School with mid-career professionals, people who had been at the UN for a decade, people who had been living in sub-Saharan Africa. But just sort of keep the faith. You will be them in a few years. And don't be intimidated. You'll learn the jargon in a couple of semesters, so you'll be able to hang with them in a conversation, and the job offers will come.
All right, thank you guys. So the next question is, what does your job entail on a day-to-day basis? So you all said what you do, just like what Jess said is the first question you get asked, but I think, for someone who's not in, especially someone in college who maybe hasn't worked, in the kind of careers that you guys are in, it's sometimes hard to imagine, like, what does your job actually entail? Are you meeting with people? Are you just sitting in front of a computer doing emails all day? I mean, are you doing analysis? Like, what exactly do you do?
I'll jump in.
Please.
Right now, so in management consulting, your job changes every 6 months, right? I mean, you kind of do a little bit of everything. It's very much a jack of all trades type of industry. It will vary based on who your client is, the contract you're working under. So I'll talk about what I'm doing right now because I think it's interesting. I am working on a project. It's a big COVID-19 project where at Guidehouse, we actually recently acquired Navigate Consulting, and they had a huge healthcare portfolio. And healthcare is not my I don't know a lot about how healthcare works. And the more I work with those folks, the more I know I don't know, right? However, I have done a lot of work in government grant financing and emergency financing for post-disaster recovery. And the same laws that govern that financing mechanism, like if Mississippi were to be hit by another hurricane, the same exact bills and laws that fund the recovery efforts there are being used to fund the COVID-19 pandemic. So the same exact policy mechanisms, the same exact people, the same exact program offices are the ones that are actually cutting the checks to hospitals, clinics, counties, school districts to buy PPE and disinfect their facilities and build temporary facilities to house COVID patients or to do testing. And we've actually done a lot of work lately with vaccine rollouts because the new administration has really prioritized the vaccine. And so my job is sort of to translate these policy decisions from the government into the healthcare space. What does this mean now for, University of Maryland Medical System in Baltimore, or Lake Health in Cleveland, or Wellstar Health in Atlanta? These are just some clients I've been working with. And so it's a lot of meetings, it's a lot of calls, it's a lot of me repeating myself because I'm telling the same story on each call, but that's kind of what we're trying to do for our healthcare clients right now, is to make sure that they are able to get the funding that they are legally entitled to, and that they're doing so 100% legally, above board, audit ready. We don't want them getting investigated by the GAO and on the front of the Washington Post, none of that. So that's what we're doing right now. It is high stress because it is high stakes, but that's kind of the nature of this business, and it's exciting.
Thank you.
I was going to comment on something that Bob said, actually, because very relevant to a big part of my career too, is being able to translate something into the language that's appropriate for the audience that you're briefing to. So that's been a big part of my career as well. In my case, it's taking very technical information and being able to translate them and brief them to a political, so maybe it's the kind of the reverse, but same concept, right? To brief it to congressmen and politicians. The other thing for me, which I would imagine Jess probably has a very similar experience to this, but at its most simplest, my day-to-day job involves a lot of engagement and collaboration with other people, right? And not necessarily just, within my office, but other agencies, other departments, other government agents, like agencies from other governments. And so a lot of meetings, again, like Bob said, lots of meetings, very busy days, even in COVID, it has not slowed down. So yeah.
If anything, COVID has made it worse because now you can take back-to-back meetings with agencies that used to be across the town from each other. So yeah, lots of meetings on my end too. Day to day. So I work in our strategy shop we're at a small, medium-sized tech company. So my role in the company is kind of to look down our technology side and look down our sales side and think, where do we need to be going in the 6 month to 2 year to 5 year range? How are external factors going to affect our business? What does the new administration do? What are foreign privacy laws doing? How does China's rise impact our opportunities for international sales? These are the things that we're trying to take and use to help shape our business model and figure out what our product needs to look like to make sure we're building effective solutions. I think in a lot of ways that Bob says, I'm taking a lot of things that I don't know, that I'm not an expert on, and trying to get smart on them real quick and figure out how it affects our core business. So what is it about AI, machine learning, that is so important to so many of our customers? It's kind of a very generic term and it means a lot of things to a lot of different people. So let's figure out what it actually means to us. Let's figure out what it means to our customers and then communicate that about a solution, not just some textbook answer. And I love what Laura was just saying. I think Crofties are really good at this part of taking big information, synthesizing it, digesting it, and then communicating it effectively. In fact, I think that might be the best, other than helping us shape the way we think about problems, not how to unpack problems, but then communicating those back to people is probably the best thing that Croft does for us. And I think we use that. I use that every day, whether it's in my current job in the private sector or when I was doing intelligence for the government. It's a fundamental trait that Croft has given us.
I totally agree with that comment. I do think that the real strength of Croft, it not only are the briefing skills, the verbal briefing skills, but also the written briefing skills. The ability to synthesize a large amount of information into a paragraph, because your boss is reading 100 things a day, does not have the time to go into the detail. That's incredibly important. And I think Croft really helps set students up for success with that. But also the interpersonal skills. I think being able to have a professional conversation with a colleague, even if it's over a contentious issue, and kind of achieve a resolution to that topic is so important to my day-to-day. So again, I work on the China desk, we call it. My office is solely responsible for managing US-China policy for the entire State Department. And it also takes the lead on US-China policy for the interagency. So myself working on the human rights portfolio, every day I'm talking to anywhere between 10 and 15 offices that care about China human rights for some reason, whether it's asking the question of what we should do about forced labor abuses in Xinjiang. What do we do about women's rights abuses across the country? Every office has their own opinion, and helping to negotiate those opinions and develop a coherent policy is a big part of what my office does. So as far as what that looks like on a day-to-day, it really depends on the day. And so it might be briefing verbally senior department leaders on developing issues, drafting memos for the Secretary of State, attending interagency meetings at the White House, both in person and virtually nowadays, briefing foreign diplomats on developing situations, NGOs, Congress, but also, most importantly, meeting with PRC government officials themselves to talk about our concerns. So it really depends on the day, but it's a pretty exciting place to work.
So my day-to-day probably looks a lot like these other guys, reading and responding to emails, sitting in meetings, on the phone constantly. I never quite nail the answer to the question, what do you do? And it always depends on who I'm talking to. But so I've spent about, I guess, 8 years overseas with my particular office. And depending on what country I'm living in, the day-to-day can feel dramatically different. So I started my overseas time in Afghanistan on a little military base on the border with Pakistan. And now I'm in Bogota, which is a cosmopolitan developed urban center and a lovely apartment. But the actual what I do is pretty similar to what McDaniel said about sort of being able to approach an incredibly complex set of issues and unpack what the specific problem sets are and how we can approach them. So here in Colombia, the OTI program started in 2015. I got here in 2018. And we sort of started the program just before the country's historic peace accord with the FARC guerrilla group was signed, with the intention of supporting the Colombian government and Colombian communities figure out how best to implement the peace accord. And that's still what we're doing here today. So that means that the sort of range of issues that I get to engage on any given day go from rural insecurity, so the armed groups that are sort of filling the vacuum that the FARC left behind and their effect on communities, to unfortunately skyrocketing coca cultivation in the country, which drives a lot of that violence and how we might respond. I spend at least 90% of my day talking to Colombians, interacting with Colombians. My program employs about 100 Colombians, and that makes my outlook on things and my decision making 1,000 times better. Somebody put a question in the chat about sort of like, what was it about Croft that helped you understand how to work either in the interagency or cross-culturally? I think the answer is kind of a lame one, but it's a little bit of everything that you wrote in your question. It's I remember the work I did on my undergraduate thesis and the briefing that I did, sort of the defense was really important. I spent a year in Argentina during study abroad, which helped me sort of wrap my head around what it's like to live in a different culture and sort of adapt to a different country. And yeah, just general conversation with my peers and my professors. So do it all.
Thank you, guys. So in the interest of making sure we have enough time to do the breakout sessions in a little bit, I want to focus on some of the stuff that the students might be most interested in. So tell me, and try to be as concise as possible. What were the key steps in your trajectory from a freshman in Croft to your current position? So kind of that, the key things, and then also, and maybe really, not just like your whole narrative of how you got there, but like something you did that really made the difference in that trajectory.
I have a very immediate answer to that, which Dr. Schenk knows this, but I received a Boren Award for International Study during undergrad, and that funded my year study abroad in Harbin, China, as well as Beijing. But that scholarship has a service requirement and a hiring authority, which for those who don't know is essentially a get out of USA jobs free card. Essentially, it's a tool that hiring managers in the federal government can use to hire you instead of the thousands of people that apply to this government website. So that combined with my internship with the DoD, which got me my security clearance, those are the only reasons why I got my first job as a DoD contractor, which led to getting hired at state. I might have found another roundabout way to getting hired at state, but those key decisions for me, applying for Boren, applying for that DoD internship, really set me up for success.
Just a quick follow-up, because I think that's a great point about the Boren and the work, the requirement slash, but benefit. I think there are a few other ways of getting that. And so that's something, as Croft students, we can definitely, Ms. Starnes can give you more information about some of the ways of getting that, that government employment bonus.
Yeah, I'll have an answer, and it's not directly related to Croft. It is more of a DC phenomenon. It kind of goes back to what the panel was saying earlier about networking. I got my current job by reaching out to an old colleague of mine, someone I hadn't spoken to in maybe 2 years at that point. And I found him on LinkedIn. And I said, it looks like you're doing some interesting stuff. He said, this is when I was working for PricewaterhouseCoopers. He said, are you interested in coming over to PwC? I didn't really know much about it, looked into it. And then 2 weeks later, I met with his boss. Then I had an interview and then I had an offer. It was very quick. And if I hadn't had just on a whim reached out to an old colleague and asked him, hey, what are you doing these days? I haven't heard from you. What are you up to? I wouldn't be in the position I am in. And I think that that is one little thing. It's kind of like that first domino you tip over and then all these things happen, right? Networking is important. I know it's awkward. It is uncomfortable to talk about work sometimes, and it's uncomfortable to reach out to people that you might have met a few years ago, or even reach out to a stranger that somebody's giving you their point of contact information for. But it's very important in DC. Networking goes a long way, so don't be afraid to put yourself out there and tell people you're interested in what they're doing.
Agree. I'll quickly add, for me, I'll say, get that clearance. To Tori's point, I was working a job I didn't love. It was okay, but it offered me a clearance and it got me to that next step of where I was really loving exactly what I was doing, and it led me to what I'm doing now. So if you have an opportunity, and that's something, you know, if that's a lot of government work does require that, even if you're not going to be in the intelligence field. So that's something to consider.
Yeah, my solution to that, to this, you know, getting a job or getting a clearance thing was pretty simple. I just joined the military. It was, you know, piece of cake. Sign on the dotted line, sign your life away for a few years, and you're golden. I mean, I did do ROTC. I spent 4 of my first 5 years on active duty overseas in Korea, Japan, Afghanistan, before I came to DC. That gave me a really good foundation that when I eventually got to DC, I had work experience, but I actually still got here without a job. I had the clearance in my back pocket, but I didn't have a job. I still had to do an internship, even with 5 years of experience. And I think being willing to do that internship is really important, because it's just going to set you off. It's, again, that goes back to the networking. It goes back to building a little bit of cred here in DC. You know, Jess talked about the importance of going to grad school. You don't have to go to grad school to get a job in DC, but going to grad school will be very beneficial for working in DC. And I think at some point, if you're going to stay here long term, you're going to have to go get an MA. People just kind of start expecting it, unless you have some really awesome experience because you've, you know, killed Osama bin Laden or something. They're gonna say, even then they're probably gonna be like, yeah, but this guy went to Georgetown for 2 years. You know, Elliott School at GW is a fine school, but Georgetown is really the better security studies program in the city. It's just small things. But yeah, join the military. Short story.
To McDaniel's point, although he is incorrect about some things, do whatever it takes. So I told you, like, before I moved to DC, I applied for 5 or 6 internships at sort of what are, in international affairs, the flagship think tanks or organizations, USIP, CSIS, Brookings, et cetera. None of them gave me the time of day. I ended up taking an internship with this sort of loony guy who was working on Latin American issues, and he had this crew of 30 interns who were also willing to do what it takes in this basement office in DuPont Circle. And that was like the start. And then I took 2 more internships, unpaid. And then I came down here to Bogota in 2010, and I took another unpaid internship. All the while, like in between, you know, waiting tables, running drinks at a bar, trying to do my coursework, living in a group house with 6 dirty people. I mean, this is DC, right? So definitely do what it takes. I want to acknowledge that everything I just said entails a tremendous amount of privilege, right? That I could do so much unpaid work that really got me to where I am today, and survive. I mean, I worked my butt off, but in similar to sort of get the clearance in my field, get the international experience is sort of one of the things that's really important. And that can be incredibly hard. That's a hard threshold to cross. When you don't have experience to qualify for the overseas jobs, it's hard to get overseas to get the experience. So I think I would encourage you, if you're interested in working internationally at all, keep your eyes open for the kinds of opportunities that Tori described, the Boren Award, for example, that give you the opportunity to get overseas, to get some experience without, without having to sacrifice a ton of other things in your life. It can be really difficult.
All right, thank you guys. So kind of changing gears a little bit, what is one thing in general that you love about living in DC, and what is one thing you hate about it?
On Tuesday nights before COVID, Mcdaniel and I would go to Duffy's Irish Club and play trivia. We've won a few times. We've got a little crew there. I think the social aspect is what people like about it. You meet a lot of people from Croft up here, a lot of people from Ole Miss, a lot of people from all over, right? It's not only a lot of people from across America, but across the world. You meet a lot of people. I think that's interesting. People have passions and interests and they're ambitious, and it's a good group of people, I think, to be around. So that's the positive. I mean, the negatives are the negatives of most big cities on the East Coast. It's expensive. There's a lot of traffic. But that's kind of the trappings of a larger city. So those are my immediate thoughts. I really like being able to have a good community of friends.
Bob, we might be neighbors because I live very close to Duffy's. But very similar, like DC is an amazing city. It's walkable, it's really clean. Folks are really open-minded, and a lot of people move to DC for a reason, which means that you have a lot of passionate people here that are really fascinating to talk to. But same thing, negatives, it's expensive. I remember the sticker shock having moved up here immediately after graduating. I was not prepared. And in general, the kind of culture here is not incredibly supportive of work-life balance. You can find the jobs. And as I've gotten older, I've done a better job at protecting my personal time, but it's definitely not the norm, I would say, of my colleagues who work in industries like consulting or government work. I think I'll leave it there.
I'll pick up on that same note. I think the thing I don't like about DC is the game. A lot of people move here for a reason because they're passionate about being in power. And so they are constantly trying to game the system. They're not looking out for their teammates. They're not looking out for the mission. They're just trying to get the next job, the bigger job, get to that, GS-15 position or that SES position, get some appointment, or go back and get elected back in their home district or whatever it is. There's a lot of that, type A personality that is go, go, go all the time. And that can be really, really draining. Even just to be around it, even if you manage to carve out the work-life balance, you're going to have bosses who are at the office until 8:30 on a Tuesday because it's Tuesday. And it drives me crazy because, I feel like people should be able to work more efficiently. And if you have to work that many hours to get the job done when it's not extraordinary circumstances, I think something's wrong with what we're doing here. All that being said, it is a great place to live because it's an amazing city, because of the social aspect, but because it's also a place where you can have real impact. You can help, shape the course of the U.S. and U.S. foreign policy. You can make sure, the good guys are doing good stuff and keeping people safe. You can really have an outsized impact when you think about, I just graduated from a college in little Oxford, Mississippi, and you can be in DC in a few months, helping out in the Pentagon, helping shape policy, working at the State Department, and managing diplomatic relations with powerful countries, nuclear countries. And it's amazing to think that we can have that impact, and we can either give back to the country or we can make a little money too. It doesn't hurt.
All right, thank you guys. And so the last two questions, and I think we'll have plenty of time for breakout sessions. This is good. So, and maybe you guys can pick one of the two. I'll ask both at the same time, and you can kind of speak to whichever one you want to. So the one question is, and you've said a lot about this already. I think Mcdaniel just gave a great, description of what's meaningful about his work, or what could be meaningful about it. So the first is, what is the most meaningful part of your work? And then another question you might want to answer is, what is the greatest challenge you faced in your career, and how did you face it?
I'll jump on what's meaningful. I've done a lot of work in our emergency management space, and I'll give one example of a project that was very meaningful in that we were talking to real people who were really affected by a very significant event, Hurricane Maria. We went to Puerto Rico not that long afterwards, and we met with the Puerto Rican Commonwealth government, basically the state government level equivalent. And we helped negotiate some agreements on some policies and processes between the federal government and Puerto Rico, as well as the local municipalities on the island. And just seeing people that were very grateful for us to be there and help them, because frankly, they just needed some help of any form. They were taking anything they could get. And because, we literally spoke to the mayor of a city in Puerto Rico, and she said, I'm just trying to make sure people are staying alive right now. That's like number one. I can't deal with these policy and bureaucracy issues, so for us to be able to just help in that sort of manner, I thought was really special. We've done a lot of work in lots of municipalities. That Puerto Rico work was particularly interesting to me, because it was the challenges, challenges, just that whole issue logistically was quite challenging. Going to an island that is at closest a 4-hour flight away, when you're not sure the airport's even operating can be tough, right? So yeah, a lot of challenges in that space, but it's way more rewarding than it's challenging, I think.
It's weird because Bob stole my answer. I feel super lucky because I am able to find meaning in almost every day of my job. My particular office in USAID works in places that are profoundly affected by conflict. So usually we're working in communities where people have been victims of some terrible violence. And what we get to do is we get to bring sort of the resources of the US government, and I would say advice, but frankly, they tell us what is the best solution and we help them make it happen. And that is super cool. Being able to go to a community where there are no resources, a community in Northern Mali. I got to work in the real life Timbuktu, where Al-Qaeda had occupied that town for almost a year, had been driven out, and the people there were terrified. And we got to go in and say, what do you need to be able to bring this town back to life? Or here in Colombia, where yes, the civil war is over because there was a peace accord signed in 2016, but they're still facing a ton of challenges. And despite the fact that grassroots social leaders are being targeted by the armed actors who remain in operation in the country, people are coming forward to lead development initiatives to, educate young people or implement parts of the accord on the super local level. So I get to just be there and listen to their good ideas and figure out a way to finance them. And that's pretty cool.
I personally love showing up to work every day, knowing I'm serving the American people, get a big kick out of that. And like Mcdaniel and others have said, the opportunity to work on issues that have like a real world impact. But the same reason why the work is so meaningful because of that impact can also be its greatest challenge, because when you mess it up, you can really mess it up, and it has really grave impacts for the lives of Americans and others overseas. So specifically on the human rights portfolio, we work a lot on individual cases. So we have a lot of meetings with American citizens and legal permanent residents whose family members are detained, missing, imprisoned. and trying to advocate on those specific cases where 9 times out of 10 we get no positive movement from a host government can be really personally challenging.
I'll share 2 challenges. And these have nothing to do with my current job, but from my time in the military and in the intelligence community. It is hard, especially in the intelligence community, but also in the Department of Defense, to do a lot of work that then you can't talk about, or you will never see the results of, or the fact that you're doing your job well means nothing happened. And it's hard. It was really hard, especially early on in my career, to see no product. My product was that things continue to pace, like things stayed normal. And it's hard to get value out of that sometimes. But I think the more you recognize what are my real goals here, or who are the people that are benefiting from this job, it helps you kind of get over that. And then I think the other challenge for me has been kind of seeing some of my dreams slip away. I went to Croft, I graduated from Croft, I joined the military, all with really the intention of that I was going to come out the other side and I was going to be a case officer, an ops officer at the CIA. It's what I was going to do. It's what I wanted to do. It's one of the reasons, I wanted to study Chinese. And, you get to that point in your life, and I was married, and the things you have to give up, they change, and you make that decision that my goals have changed, and the dreams I have aren't the dreams I necessarily want. And that was tough, but I love where I am, and I love the career I've had, and I've loved the cool things that I've gotten to do, and the great people I've gotten to work with, and the people I've gotten to serve with.
All right, thank you guys. So yes, I think Ms. Starnes is going to get us set up in our breakout rooms. And I think the students have already told her where they want to go. So you alumni, when you join, you'll see your crowd.
Yes, and you can just leave from the breakout room, students and alumni. So there's no, time that you have to stay in there for, just however long you're willing to and you can. We don't want this to be, don't make it last 10 minutes is fine. We just wanted students to have some more one-on-one time to ask questions, just a little bit more time for you to get into specifics about what you do or maybe your path that you've gone through. So I'll start adding people now. It might take just a couple minutes, so y'all are welcome to talk amongst yourselves.
Right. So yes, and while she's doing that, thank you guys, Jess, Tori, McDaniel, Bob, and Laura for speaking with us this evening. And thank you to the, I think if you count the 7 of us, there's 39 students. That's a great turnout. Despite came out despite the travel bans here in Oxford. I was telling Laura when I first got on, I'm sure you guys, if you're on the Rebel Alerts, you got the ominous text saying multiple areas on campus city counting reporting hazardous road conditions. So glad we're able all to join from the safety of our homes. Yeah, real quick, actually, this is a question from one of our students. Maybe as Bree, some of you may hear it, some of you may be put into the breakout room before you do. What were your concentrations in Croft, real quick?
Business and econ, international business and economics.
And what region?
Europe. So I did European. And I guess, I don't know if they had, no, they didn't have Western and Eastern because I studied German.
Great. Okay. Thanks.
For me, business and Latin America.
Asia, and I think I tied with the business and governance concentrations.
East Asia, and I tied with econ and international peace and security.
I don't think there was international peace and security when I went through, but I definitely focused on Latin America. I thought I was going to be a Latin Americanist, and then I worked everywhere but Latin America until I came back here.
All right. I don't have my remote desktop open, but I could have pulled up your records and told you exactly what we had you down for.
And to that point, in business and economics, I told Dr. Buskus this last time I saw him, which must have been a year and a half, 2 years ago, maybe. that his math class was the first ever math class, business calc class. Took my first year at Croft. Was the first math class I ever actually enjoyed. And that combined with Dr. Terasawa's Microsoft Excel course, I still use stuff I learned in those classes every single day.
Yes,
Yeah.
Dr. Busk has just confirmed he's excited to teach his math class again next fall. So the beat goes on for sure.
Excellent.
And Dr. Terasawa's course has moved on from Croft. But we have a Dr. Fregoso Gonzalez who teaches INST 101 and does Excel. I think some of the students, he was off for a year, so we had Dr. Guo do it at one point a couple years ago, but we're trying to keep that up. Every time we ask alumni, you know, about the curriculum and everyone says that Excel was really useful.
Let me tell you something about Excel, guys. Take the class and do it well, know how to do it, and then never admit to knowing Excel. Because you will be stuck doing Excel for whatever office you were put in for the rest of your life as soon as you show you are capable. So make it a hidden talent. Word of advice.
Yeah, don't let anybody tell you that like the international monetary regime rests on fiat currencies and exchange rates. No, it is just Microsoft Excel is propping up the entire global economy.